Welcome to DevOps Summit 2022. My name is Rob Jan. I'm a platform evangelist here at Dynatrace. And today we're going to be talking about how organizations need to keep their systems available and resilient to support business demands, and how service level objectives, or SLOs, are the new contract between business, DevOps, and SREs. However, we're finding that DevOps teams are struggling with which ones to incorporate into their processes. So my talk today will drill into this topic and share some of the best practices and ways that Dynatrace is helping many organizations keep their SLO promises. Let's get started.
First, a quick word on Dynatrace. First of all, we're very proud of the fact that we have leading companies all over the world who have put their trust into Dynatrace. And it's assuring to know that analysts from Gartner, Forrester, ISG, and other peer reviews all rank Dynatrace as the #1 leader in the market with the ability to deliver and our strength for strategy and vision. We're also a publicly traded company, and we have a team that's worldwide made up of over 3,000 members. So let's get into our topic for today. Our agenda is really talking about why SLOs, as mentioned, they're critical in the contract between the development teams and our business. And we want to understand a little bit more about how we go about defining these things, what kind of questions we should ask, because a lot of times teams are struggling with implementing and defining these SLOs. So we're going to get into the implementation, some of the education around the terminology, and then talk about how we can scale up the SLOs by shifting left and transforming our organization. So first of all, let's dig into why SLOs. Many companies, as they're digitally transforming, adding new technologies, migrating to the cloud, want to do so with techniques such as progressive delivery, feature flags, blue-green deployments, because the goal here is to deliver things faster, more frequently. But the trick is to do this all without releasing with a high risk, with security problems. And the question to ask yourself, is your team set up for success to balance the need of delivering fast, but also to deliver with high-quality software? So if you're feeling you're not totally there, well, you're not alone. Many of the tools that people have and the processes that people are implementing are still putting things at risk. Through our surveys of some of our customers in the industry, we're seeing that leaders do admit that they're sacrificing code quality as they innovate faster. They're actually putting vulnerabilities improperly tested before they put them into production. And the reason this is happening is because they're constrained by a lot of the manual processes, both to build, test, deploy, and automate code getting into production. And also, as we're triaging issues that come up as a result of quality and security problems, that's taking away from the time to go back and spend on innovation. So as an observability platform, we often see this scenario where we have internal dashboards the IT teams are looking at where everything's showing green, but the actual customer experience of what people are feeling, whether that's performing transactions to book an airline, to do a Black Friday shopping, or any type of online digital experience that's taking place, is often a mismatch. And so what we're trying to do is use the service level objectives to help manage this. And do this really not just from an IT, is my CPU high, but really managing it for business relevant SLOs, as you can see here. So this is a screenshot from one of the Dynatrace dashboards. We're measuring a service level for the user journey, such as logins, checkouts, payouts, payments. And also combining that through the use of the time series data that makes up these service level objectives, and then combining that with the SRE kind of golden signals. If you've read this from Google, it's called the 4 golden signals, where you're looking at response times and throughput and error rates and processing time or saturation time. So these sort of four golden signals help with the IT view to understand the health of the system as they're supporting the overarching service level objectives. But these service level objectives, aren't actually easy. We've done through our surveys too that SREs are really defining, having a challenge with this area of defining things for a variety of reasons. It could just be there's disparate data sources, as you can see as these charts show up, too many metrics, just not having agreement between teams, not even knowing where to get started. So today we're hoping that where to get started and what you're seeing in best practices is really what we're going to try to go through today. And, just to highlight this, and think of the inverse of these questions as, can we agree to the definition of availability and error rates? Can we have SLOs that are actually relevant to my work? Having a dashboard full of different lines and charts that doesn't translate to people taking action really doesn't do any good. Because if it's just a dashboard everyone looks at and there isn't someone accountable, then that's just creating undue work to maintain these dashboards and SLOs. And so it's really important that we understand what we measure in these things and how we go about measuring the SLOs, and is that SLO actually realistic? Saying that you're going to have zero downtime is really not realistic. Having an unrealistic response time target, through different time periods, they're all throughout the day, 24/7. Is that really realistic? So what we've done through some of our workshops with our customers is, and I want to walk you through an organization that was rolling out a mobile business app. So here they wanted to replace a current mobile app with an updated mobile app. And so the important thing that the business wanted was application adoption. So they wanted to see that if 65% of the new customers would use the new app versus the old app, then that was really a target they had. Sometimes business folks call these KPIs, but service level objective is just kind of a standard terminology I'll be using today. And also the application ratings, being able to know, what is that feedback from the user? This kind of ties to their experience, not real-time experience, but actually, what was their experience with the app? So by, in Dynatrace, we were pulling in the actual feed from the Android and the iOS store, tying that in as a real-time metric, and we can see whether, the star rating, rated out of 5 was reaching the score. And what we saw, what the customer really was saying, why were people complaining about and scoring the app row, is because there was a lot of mobile crashes. So being able to monitor the mobile app for this specific, negative experience and establish a service level target around it was also a key measure to, driving the application adoption. And so what you can see here on the left, I've added in who is responsible for these targets. So the business, is marketing it, trying to get it out there. That's something really outside the hands of an IT organization. However, the DevOps team can control something like the mobile app crashes and has influence over their app rating, because if they have broader coverage, better automated test suites to show which devices are actually passing functionally, they can hopefully increase that or reduce, in this case, the mobile app store crashes. But purely from an IT perspective, these type of metrics of availability, response time, error rates, those 4 gold signals, as I was mentioning, really drive these types of metrics. And we want to measure those in conjunction with the business level objectives. So your site reliability engineers really are kind of focusing on availability, making sure the app is available, the infrastructure is there in place, and that also has an influence over the response time. But your DevOps teams, folks that are writing the code, testing the code, have a much direct influence over the errors in the application and response time issues that are related to the code. So what's key, in conclusion to all this, is just that we have an app owner, we have a clear and realistic target, and we're measuring from both an IT perspective and a business objective, and putting things in a framework in which we can all operate from and hold people accountable to when things go wrong. So if we talk a little bit about service level objectives, you've heard me throw out SLOs, but there are some other terminology that's in the industry. Service level indicators. So service level indicator is the actual measurement, such as a response time, and that is what is directly calculated into an objective. So you can see in the little notes, I have a measurement, and then I have objectives such as 400 milliseconds or less, 90% of the time over some time frame. And another thing you'll hear out with service level management is error budgets, as well as service level agreements. So an error budget is usually where is the impact at a point in time relative to my target. So if I think of, I have 10 minutes of downtime in a given month, I have a small outage, I have 2 minutes taken away, I now have 8 minutes left in my SLO budget. So by plotting this over time, we can really be triggered and alerted on and see where I'm at higher risk of maybe approving a release or not approving a release based on how much error budget I have left. And then the service level agreements is usually a contractual status for a service level objectives. We've seen some firms and development firms be held for bonuses based on making sure that their service level agreements are met. And so we want to have these dashboards visible for everyone, for a service team. As mentioned, we want to both show a time frame of the overall objective, the current objective, so that we can see if we're on track, because people are looking at different points in time. Usually management is often looking at a broader time frame for, say, a month or a given release, but the operations folks maybe want to be monitoring availability and response time at a more shorter time frame. And so we want to make sure that we're, meeting our SLOs and that we're proactively managing those, whether that's in an hour time frame, 24-hour time frame. And so you can see some of these. This is the guidance that we typically we give and we see out in the industry. So speaking of industry best practices, we've talked about kind of a business and an IT type of view, but these are some frameworks that we've seen out there. This one, you can see these are starting with the letters. So rate, errors, duration, or red is looking at distribution of response times relative to the throughput and the errors achieved. We've seen one with use, which is more of a consumption relative to errors framework. We've also mentioned the 4 golden signals, which is based on the Google SRE handbook, which kind of focuses on those same ones, but also ties into the latency related to or how much time it takes to process. So each of these metrics can be driven at different tiers of the application. So here, this is a bit of one that we use in Dynatrace because we are very focused on the end user experience and have a user-centric view as kind of driving our kind of service levels down. And so these types of metrics can come from a variety of sources, and as mentioned, it could be depending on the tier. So if I'm a database, my saturation may be database connections, for example, or it could be a threading or queuing. Response time is pretty understandable and pretty consistent. But availability, as mentioned back in our definitions, what does availability mean? Is that coming from synthetic? Is that coming from real users? Is it a combination? Those types of things. So these types of discussions need to take place for each of these buckets. And it's really, you're not trying to manage every single metric you can, but these are high-level indicators, things that are going to drive action for investigation or corrective action for releases. So kind of in summarize form, what we see is, as just kind of highlighted again, is really understanding the terminology, the goals, getting our stakeholders engaged to help with these decisions. And really what helps is mapping this to that user-centric view, understanding where user journeys are key to the business. Typically, these are being managed often and reported on a monthly basis. But if we can get down into the specific metrics real time, we can manage that user journeys, their health, as well as system boundaries when we're talking on the IT side. So if we're using a shared API or that shared API is used across multiple boundaries, then it's critical that we're monitoring that as well. And as mentioned, it's important that we have a clearly defined, you might have heard of this acid test, but it's a measurable, realistic indicator that we can do. And we have a clear owner for each of these identified service level objectives, and we use error budgets, which is not appropriate for every metric, but it's a great way for managing proactively things. And we want to make these visible, so it's not just a monthly report, or we want these dashboards. We want the data to be sent out and visible for all folks to see and know how the organization is being run. So, another topic that I want to get into, because we've talked about more of an operational service level objective, but it's very important to scale this up, that we're starting earlier in the life cycle. We want to be shifting left, not just operationally managing SLOs, but to be building in this quality into our products. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this, because our challenge, and this was the promise of DevOps, that Dev and Ops would be working together, and now we have this concept of SRE. So really, these three teams oftentimes are not in sync with this goal of having an SLO. Typically, an operational side, your focus on reliability, on once code is deployed, what sort of failure rates are there. Are we managing the ability to identify issues as well as restore service? So these types of service levels is often how Ops is viewing the world. But on the Dev side, there's that pressure of how quickly you're deploying. How quickly can I get a new release out there? And so this conflict is often, needing to ask as questions is, okay, you built it quickly and you have a new release, but is it really, really safe to put out there? Can I speed up this time? If I want to add more quality in my build cycle, can I speed up the time that it takes to get performance results or do the security scans? Because often this can slow down the ability to deliver faster, and you don't want to skip those critical steps. But it's important, as we're having a more complex environment, as more releases are happening, that we have a very good handle, that our monitoring tools understand what stages contain what versions and builds across all the environments, so that we are aware what's running where, and if we need to roll things back, we can quickly identify maybe when issues are identified, such as a security vulnerability. If we think about the log4shell issue, vulnerabilities pop up all the time. We see, and we immediately need to know is, where's this code running? Where am I vulnerable? Is this a customer facing application? Is this an inward facing application? Is this just in a non-prod environment? So really understanding, what releases are where, quickly understanding that impact of identified security vulnerabilities is key. And then being able to do analysis. So if I am doing a new build or I'm turning on a feature flag, can I quickly compare, from a performance, response time, those types of metrics, as well as security vulnerabilities or other architectural resource consumptions, between the different builds as I'm making them happen. And it's because it's really ultimately about, understanding your risk. Do I have a security risk? Do I have a risk related to my error budget that's remaining? Am I a critical point of the business and I don't want to impact my conversion, such as like a Black Friday shopping window, those types of things. It's really important to take all this data so that you can make release decisions. And so I'll just kind of talk a little bit about how Dynatrace helps with some of this. One thing I mentioned was around understanding your deployment. So here we have a feature which we call the release inventory. So real time, we're detecting what versions and builds are available within different environments. We can group them by application types, product lines, and be able to quickly analyze what's running where. And as we push code out, we have informing Dynatrace around events that are taking place. So if I'm deploying a code release through one of my CI/CD pipelines, I want to know the build that did it. Can I automatically link this release to the job and the owner that did it? Or if I turn a feature flag on, can I identify who did that, what change ticket? And that's something that's out of the box for us. So we know what versions are where. We have insights to what's happening. We also know the build is running, especially with containerized environments. If you think of Kubernetes, it's a highly dynamic environment. The builds of the containers are changing and they vary. They can be run independently of each other through microservices. So it's important to have that kind of real-time insights to be able to compare points in time and to know what's running where. And so this release automation validation that I was mentioning, let me walk into that and how we actually do some of that. But we work with a lot of different pipeline tools. So your organization may be running different CI/CD tools. Maybe you're starting to converge on some, but often you need to support what the dev team makes in their technology choices. And so what we've done is through the post-deployment, test kind of scenario, we start monitoring that non-prod environment. And what you're seeing here is a graph that we have a build-to-build comparison of key service level indicators rolled up into a service level score for that particular build. So it's a slightly different concept than the production operations, but the same metrics we want to measure build to build to build, and that's the idea here, so that we can do release scoring across the different dimensions of performance and security, and also return that score back real time to the pipeline so that we can make a release decision through the pipeline to allow the code to be promoted or to flag that release as valid or not. So how we're doing that on the Dynatrace side, going back to our terminology of SLIs, we have service level indicators for whatever metrics we have in Dynatrace, which has thousands of metrics from an application type of metric like a response time, or maybe a user action such as a login step, or maybe the security vulnerabilities through the real-time vulnerability package scanning. So then we have an objective here of a passing of and warning for each of the service level indicators to say, hey, if I'm under 100 milliseconds, then I pass that particular metric. And so as and then we can calculate this in an overall score. So if we can get pass 90% score, and we can weight each of these things. We can have an even distribution, or we can weight these things to get so that it calculates within a overall target range. And so now imagine I do a build, and these are metrics that would be captured, say for a performance test run or maybe a post-release validation. So I can see that these are my captured response time, failure rates, etc. In this case, everything is green, 100%. I would have passed that build. However, build number 2 comes along, Now you can see some are in a warning status. One here, I have a big failure in my login, so I'm a 50% score. I would fail this build. So developers may come along, they do a fix, some things got better, but now they've introduced a security vulnerability because they added a Now they have a security vulnerability because they've added a new package. And so because we don't want any security vulnerabilities, this build now fails. Developers fix it. Everything's looking good. Now build 4 is in a happy status. So that's really an exciting thing. So to kind of recap, what we're trying to do here is do the operational SLOs for production reliability purposes, but shift this left to the non-prod environment. So we want to be managing mean time to resolutions. We want to have SLOs for the business operations, such as those conversions and the adoptions and the revenue kind of targets that we can capture as SLOs. But then as we do the release validation before it goes to prod, we want to add these release checks. We want to have the SLOs defined by the DevOps teams and the SRE teams so that before it goes to production, we're doing release and validation along the way. And if we shift this into the development teams, then we can speed up this delivery time because we're automating the scoring. So we're not waiting for someone to manually check and look at dashboards. We're automatically defining these SLOs. And furthermore, we can take these definitions because in the case of Dynatrace, all of the configuration, all of this information can be defined as code. So the code can be checked in with the code pipeline, the observability data goes with the build, and then it's further automated fully in the hands of developers. So as we shift actually the other direction from dev to prod, we have in sync our observability, our dashboards, alerts, our service levels, all in sync with our code. And so that's really going to help us deliver consistently and faster and with less risk.
Thank you again for joining DevOps Summit 2022. My name is Rob Jan, and don't hesitate to reach out with any questions or comments. And thanks again for being here.